I never thought I'd be the parent sitting in the back row of the Riverside High School auditorium, watching my daughter Emma clutch a trophy that represented everything we'd worked for. The golden figure seemed to catch every beam of light from the stage, but it was Emma's face that truly glowed. After 3 years of watching her struggle to find her place in this prestigious academy, she had finally proven herself worthy of the Chancellor's Award for Academic Excellence. The auditorium buzzed with the familiar energy of a school ceremony. Parents adjusted their phones to capture the perfect shot. Younger siblings fidgeted in uncomfortable dress clothes, and faculty members lined the walls with practiced smiles. I found myself gripping the edge of my seat, my heart swelling with pride, as Emma stood center stage, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her scholarship uniform pressed to perfection. Emma had always been different from the other students at Riverside High. While her classmates arrived each morning in luxury cars driven by private chauffeurs, Emma walked the 2 miles from our modest apartment, her backpack heavy with textbooks she'd bought secondhand. While they discussed weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard or skiing in Aspen, Emma talked about the hours she spent tutoring elementary students at the community center for extra money. But Emma never let the differences discourage her. If anything, they fueled her determination. She understood that her presence at Riverside wasn't guaranteed by family legacy or financial donations. She was there on merit alone, and she never forgot it. The principal, Mrs. Catherine Wellington, stepped to the podium with the kind of authority that came from 20 years of managing privileged teenagers. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and her navy suit spoke of understated wealth. She cleared her throat, and the audience settled into expectant silence. Today we celebrate not just academic achievement, but the embodiment of what Riverside High School represents, Mrs. Wellington began, her voice carrying easily through the sound system. The Chancellor's Award is our highest honor, reserved for a student who has demonstrated not only intellectual excellence, but also character, leadership, and dedication to their community. I watched Emma's face as Mrs. Wellington spoke. There was no smugness in her expression, no sense of superiority. Instead, I saw the same quiet determination that had carried her through countless nights of studying, the same humility that made her spend her free time helping classmates who struggled with concepts she grasped effortlessly. This year's recipient has maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA while taking the most challenging course load available, Mrs. Wellington continued. She has volunteered over 200 hours at the local literacy center, founded the peer tutoring program that has helped over 50 students improve their grades, and somehow found time to captain the academic decathlon team to their first state championship in a decade. The audience murmured appreciatively, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Emma had never bragged about her accomplishments, never demanded recognition for her efforts. She simply did what she believed was right, day after day, without expecting anything in return. "Emma Rodriguez," Mrs. Wellington announced. "Please step forward to receive the Chancellor's Award." Emma moved with quiet grace, her steps measured and confident. She had practiced this moment in front of our bathroom mirror, worried that she might stumble or forget to smile. But now, in the actual moment, she moved like she belonged there. Because she did. The trophy was magnificent, more elaborate than any award I'd ever seen. It was crafted from what looked like genuine gold, with intricate engravings that caught the stage lights. The base was made of polished mahogany, and a small plaque bore Emma's name in elegant script. As Emma's fingers closed around it, I could see her hands trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of the moment. For a brief second, the auditorium fell silent. This was it. This was Emma's moment of triumph, the validation of everything we'd sacrificed and worked for. I could see her processing the weight of the trophy, the significance of standing on that stage, the proof that she truly belonged among the best and brightest. But then, Cutting through the silence like a blade came a voice I'd hoped never to hear again. "You don't belong here." The words seemed to hang in the air, sharp and cruel. They came from the left side of the stage, where the faculty was seated. I turned, my heart already sinking, to see Ms. Patricia Hawthorne rising from her chair. She was Emma's AP Literature teacher, a woman who had made Emma's life miserable since the beginning of sophomore year. Miss Hawthorne was everything Emma wasn't. She came from old money, the kind that traced its roots back to the founding of the city. Her great-grandfather had donated the land for Riverside High, and her family's name was etched into the cornerstone of the main building. She dressed in tweeds and pearls, spoke with the kind of accent that suggested European boarding schools, and had never worked a day in her life before accepting her teaching position as a hobby. From the moment Emma entered her classroom, Ms. Hawthorne had made it clear that she didn't approve of the school's scholarship program. She believed that Riverside should remain exclusive, that mixing students from different economic backgrounds would somehow dilute the school's prestige. Emma had become the target of her subtle but persistent discrimination. "You don't belong here," Ms. Hawthorne repeated, her voice carrying across the stunned auditorium. "This award should go to someone who truly represents what Riverside stands for, not some charity case who's been handed everything." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the collective intake of breath from hundreds of people who couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Emma stood frozen on the stage, the trophy still in her hands, her face a mask of shock and hurt. I felt something break inside me, a primal protective instinct that made me want to rush the stage and shield my daughter from this public humiliation. But I forced myself to stay seated, to trust that Emma could handle this moment with the same grace she'd shown in handling every other challenge. The other faculty members looked mortified. Mrs. Wellington's face had gone pale, and she was staring at Miss Hawthorne as if she'd never seen her before. The students in the audience were frozen, some with their mouths hanging open, others pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Emma's classmates had mixed reactions. Some of the wealthier students, particularly those who had never liked Emma's success, were smirking or whispering to each other, but others looked genuinely shocked and upset. I could see Madison Crawford, whose chemistry grades Emma had personally rescued from failure, shaking her head in disbelief. James Wellington, the principal's son and Emma's lab partner, was glaring at Miss Hawthorne with obvious disgust. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive. Emma still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. She stood there holding her trophy, processing what had just happened, trying to figure out how to respond to such a public attack. I wanted to shout, to defend my daughter, to tell everyone in that auditorium about the nights Emma had stayed up until 3 a.m. studying, about the jobs she'd worked to help pay for her school supplies, about the way she'd given up her social life to focus on her education. But I knew that anything I said would only make things worse for Emma. Then from the judges' table at the front of the auditorium came a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. It was slow, deliberate clapping. One person, clapping at a measured pace that demanded attention. Every head in the auditorium turned toward the sound. Judge William Harrison, the most respected member of the school board, and the person responsible for selecting the Chancellor's award recipient, was standing at his table. He was an imposing figure, tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect. He had been a federal judge for 30 years before retiring to serve on various educational boards. Judge Harrison continued clapping, his eyes fixed not on Emma but on Ms. Hawthorne. His expression was stern, almost severe, and there was something in his bearing that made everyone in the auditorium hold their breath. "You owe this girl an apology," Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades presiding over courtrooms. "And you owe this institution an explanation for your disgraceful behavior." Miss Hawthorne's face flushed red. But she didn't back down. "I'm simply stating what everyone else is thinking. This award should recognize excellence, not charity. There are students here who have worked just as hard." "Stop," Judge Harrison commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I've heard enough. In 30 years of reviewing academic records, I have never encountered a student more deserving of recognition than Emma Rodriguez. Her achievements are remarkable not because of her background, but in spite of it." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "While other students at this school benefit from private tutors, test prep courses, and every possible advantage, Emma Rodriguez has achieved excellence through nothing but her own determination and intelligence. She has earned a perfect GPA while working part-time to support her family. She has volunteered hundreds of hours to help other students succeed. She has shown more character and integrity than most adults I've encountered." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Judge Harrison's voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority, and even Ms. Hawthorne seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "Emma Rodriguez has done something that I find particularly admirable. She has excelled in an environment where she was made to feel unwelcome, where her achievements were questioned, where her very presence was treated as an inconvenience. And she has done it with grace, dignity, and humility." He turned to face the audience now, his voice growing stronger. "If anyone in this room doesn't belong here, it's those who would judge a student's worth based on their family's bank account, rather than their character and achievements. Emma Rodriguez embodies everything that education should represent: the power of hard work, the importance of helping others, and the beauty of succeeding against all odds." The auditorium erupted. Parents began clapping, then standing, then cheering. Students joined in, many of them on their feet, applauding not just for Emma but for Judge Harrison's words. The sound was overwhelming, a wave of support that seemed to wash away the ugliness of Ms. Hawthorne's attack. I watched Emma's face transform as the applause washed over her. The hurt and shock were replaced by something else: pride, determination, and a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her very being. She didn't cry, didn't show any sign of the pain that Ms. Hawthorne's words must have caused. Instead, she smiled, straightened her shoulders, and held the trophy higher. Mrs. Wellington quickly took control of the situation. "This ceremony is concluded," she announced, though her voice was nearly drowned out by the continuing applause. "The reception will be held in the main hall." As the crowd began to disperse, I watched Emma walk off the stage with her head held high. She moved through the groups of people like she owned the place, accepting congratulations with genuine warmth and grace. She had been tested in the most public way possible, and she had passed with flying colors. I made my way through the crowd to reach her, my heart bursting with pride. When I finally got close enough, I saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but they were tears of triumph, not defeat. "Mom," she said, her voice steady and strong, "did you see that? Did you see what Judge Harrison said?" "I saw everything, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her into a hug. "I saw you handle yourself with more dignity than that teacher deserved." "I wasn't sure I could do it," Emma admitted. "When she said those things, I felt like I was back in elementary school, being told I wasn't smart enough, wasn't good enough. But then I looked at the trophy, and I thought about all the nights you worked double shifts so I could have school supplies, and all the times you helped me practice presentations, and I realized that she was wrong. I do belong here. I've earned my place here." We stood there in the middle of the crowded auditorium, holding each other, and I felt like we were indeed different people from when we'd walked in. Emma had been forced to confront her deepest insecurities in front of hundreds of people, and she had emerged stronger. Over the following weeks, the story of what happened at the Chancellor's Award ceremony spread throughout the school and beyond. A video of the incident, recorded by a student's phone, went viral on social media. Emma became something of a local celebrity, but she handled the attention with the same grace she had shown on the stage. Ms. Hawthorne was quietly asked to resign, and Judge Harrison personally wrote a letter of recommendation for Emma's college applications. The peer tutoring program that Emma had founded was officially recognized by the school district and expanded to other schools in the area. But perhaps most importantly, Emma's example inspired other scholarship students to embrace their achievements without apology. The incident had forced the school community to confront some uncomfortable truths about privilege and belonging, and while change was slow, it was undeniable. 6 months later, Emma received acceptance letters from every college she'd applied to, including several Ivy League schools. She chose to attend Stanford on a full scholarship, planning to major in education policy, with the goal of making quality education more accessible to students from all backgrounds. On the night before she left for college, Emma and I sat in our small apartment, packing her few belongings into boxes. She picked up the Chancellor's Award trophy, which had been sitting on our mantel since the ceremony, and held it up to the light. "You know what I realized?" she said, turning the trophy over in her hands. "Ms. Hawthorne was right about one thing. I don't belong at Riverside High School. I belong somewhere much bigger, somewhere I can make a real difference." I looked at my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had overcome so much with such grace, and I knew that wherever she went she would indeed make a difference. The girl who had been told she didn't belong anywhere had discovered that she belonged everywhere. Emma packed the trophy carefully in her suitcase, but I knew she was carrying something much more valuable. The knowledge that she had earned her place in the world, that her achievements were her own, and that no one could ever take that away from her. As I watched her prepare for the next chapter of her life, I realized that the teacher who had tried to diminish Emma had actually done her a favor. She had forced Emma to confront her fears, to stand up for herself, and to recognize her own worth. In trying to tear Emma down, Ms. Hawthorne had actually helped her soar. The night Emma left for Stanford, I found a note she'd left on my pillow. It was written in her careful handwriting, the same handwriting that had earned her perfect scores on countless essays and exams. "Mom," it read, "thank you for teaching me that belonging isn't about where you come from or what you have. It's about who you are and what you contribute. I may not have belonged at Riverside because of my background, but I earned my place there through my efforts, and I'll earn my place everywhere I go from now on. I love you, and I'll make you proud." I held that note for a long time, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Emma had started as a scholarship student who felt out of place among her wealthy classmates. She had ended as a young woman who knew that her worth wasn't determined by others' opinions, but by her own actions and achievements. The story of the Chancellor's Award ceremony became family legend, something we'd tell and retell over the years. But it was more than just a story about a moment of public humiliation turned triumph. It was a story about resilience, about the power of hard work, and about the importance of having people who believe in you when you're struggling to believe in yourself. Years later, when Emma was a successful advocate for educational equity, she would tell her own children about the night she stood on that stage, holding a trophy that represented everything she'd worked for, and learned that she truly belonged anywhere she chose to go. She would tell them that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most challenging moments, and that the people who try to tear you down often end up making you stronger. The trophy still sits on Emma's desk in her office, a reminder of the night she discovered that she didn't need anyone's permission to belong. She had earned her place through her own efforts, and that knowledge had given her the confidence to take on the world. And in taking on the world, she had indeed made it a better place for students like herself, students who might otherwise be told they don't belong, but who, with the right support and encouragement, could achieve anything they set their minds to. The teacher who had tried to diminish Emma's achievement had inadvertently created a moment that would inspire countless others. In trying to exclude one remarkable student, she had actually helped create a movement toward inclusion that would benefit thousands of students in the years to come. That's the thing about trying to tear down someone who truly belongs. It often just helps them realize how high they can actually soar. And Emma Rodriguez, the girl who was told she didn't belong, had soared higher than anyone could have imagined. The Chancellor's award ceremony had lasted only an hour, but its impact would last a lifetime. For Emma, for me, and for everyone who witnessed the moment when a young woman discovered that she belonged anywhere she chose to go. It was a lesson in resilience, in dignity, and in the power of believing in yourself even when others don't believe in you. And it was a reminder that sometimes the most important victories aren't won in private moments of quiet achievement, but in public moments of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it's scary, even when you're not sure you can do it. Emma had stood on that stage and shown everyone, including herself, that she belonged not because someone gave her permission, but because she had earned her place through her own efforts. And that knowledge had set her free to pursue any dream, to tackle any challenge, and to make any difference she chose to make. The girl who had been told she didn't belong had discovered that she belonged everywhere, and that discovery had changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. It was a lesson that would ripple outward for generations, inspiring other students to believe in themselves and to pursue their dreams, regardless of what others might think. In the end, that's what the Chancellor's award ceremony had really been about. Not just recognizing one student's achievements, but celebrating the idea that excellence can come from anywhere, and that the most important qualification for success isn't where you come from, but where you're willing to go. But the story doesn't end there, because sometimes the most profound transformations happen not in the spotlight, but in the quiet moments that follow, when the world has moved on, but the real work of change is just beginning. 3 years after Emma left for Stanford, I found myself walking through the halls of Riverside High School once again. This time, I wasn't there as a parent watching my daughter receive an award. I was there as the newly appointed Director of Student Support Services, a position that had been created specifically to address the inequities that Emma's experience had brought to light. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had once felt intimidated by the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of this prestigious institution now walked these same halls with purpose and authority. My own transformation had been as dramatic as Emma's, though it had unfolded more quietly, away from the public eye. After Emma's incident, I had found myself thrust into a world of educational advocacy that I never knew existed. Parent groups sought my input on scholarship programs. Local newspapers wanted my perspective on educational equity. And slowly, almost without realizing it, I had become a voice for families like ours. The transformation hadn't been immediate. In the weeks following the ceremony, I had struggled with my own feelings of inadequacy. Watching Emma handle that public humiliation with such grace had made me proud, but it had also made me question my own role in her journey. Had I prepared her enough? Had I given her the tools she needed to succeed in a world that would constantly question her right to be there? It was during one of these late-night worrying sessions that I received a call that would change everything. Judge Harrison, the man who had stood up for Emma during the ceremony, was on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said in that same authoritative voice that had commanded respect in the auditorium, "I've been thinking about what happened at the ceremony, and I believe there's more work to be done. I'm wondering if you might be interested in joining a committee we're forming to address systemic issues in our educational system." I had never considered myself committee material. My experience was limited to working double shifts at the hospital, helping Emma with homework, and trying to make ends meet. But Judge Harrison saw something in me that I didn't yet see in myself. "Your daughter's strength didn't come from nowhere," he explained. "It came from having a mother who believed in her, who sacrificed for her, who showed her that worth isn't determined by wealth but by character. That's the kind of perspective we need." The committee meetings were intimidating at first. I sat in boardrooms filled with superintendents, principals, and policymakers, feeling like an imposter in my carefully chosen business attire. But as the discussions progressed, I realized that my perspective was not only valuable, but essential. While others debated budget allocations and policy frameworks, I talked about the reality of a parent working multiple jobs to afford school supplies. While they discussed standardized test scores, I shared stories of students who excelled despite having no quiet place to study at home. While they analyzed demographic data, I humanized the statistics with real faces and real struggles. Slowly, I found my voice. And once I found it, I discovered that others were eager to listen. The committee's work led to the creation of several new programs. A fund was established to provide not just scholarships, but also the ancillary costs that often prevented talented students from participating fully in school life. A mentorship program paired successful professionals with students from underserved backgrounds. And most importantly, a comprehensive review of school policies was conducted to identify and eliminate barriers that disproportionately affected students from lower-income families. But the real breakthrough came when the school board offered me a position heading up these new initiatives. The idea of leaving my job at the hospital terrified me. It meant giving up the security of steady income, the comfort of work I knew I could do well, and the identity I had built around being a healthcare worker. Emma, calling from her dorm room at Stanford, had no such doubts. "Mom," she said, her voice crackling through the phone connection, "do you remember what you told me when I was scared to apply to Riverside? You said that sometimes the scariest opportunities are the ones that will change your life. This is your Riverside moment." She was right. Just as Emma had once stood at the threshold of an intimidating new world, I now faced my own moment of transformation. The woman who had once felt invisible in the halls of Riverside High School was being invited to become a leader in reshaping the very institution that had once seemed so imposing. My first day as Director of Student Support Services was both terrifying and exhilarating. I walked into an office that was larger than my living room, with a view of the campus that I had only seen from the parking lot. My desk was mahogany, my chair leather, and my nameplate engraved with gold lettering. But none of that mattered as much as the stack of case files waiting for my attention. Each file represented a student who, like Emma, was trying to navigate a world that didn't always welcome them. There was Marcus, a brilliant young man whose academic performance suffered because he had to work nights to help support his family. There was Aisha, a gifted writer whose creative talents were overlooked because her essay topics reflected experiences that her teachers found uncomfortable. There was David, a math prodigy whose potential was dismissed because his learning disability made traditional testing formats nearly impossible. These students became my mission, my purpose, and my daily reminder of why the work mattered. Each success story validated Emma's journey and my own. Each challenge overcome proved that, with the right support, any student could find their place in the world. One of my first major initiatives was the creation of what we called the Hidden Potential Program. Based on Emma's experience and my own observations, I knew that many students possessed abilities that weren't being recognized by traditional measures. Some students were brilliant mathematicians who struggled with reading. Others were natural leaders who didn't fit the typical mold of student government. Still others were creative geniuses whose artistic talents were dismissed as less important than conventional academic subjects. The program was designed to identify these hidden talents and provide pathways for students to develop them. We partnered with local businesses, universities, and community organizations to create internships, mentorship opportunities, and alternative assessments that could capture abilities that standardized tests missed. The first student to benefit from the program was a young woman named Isabella Chen. She had been struggling in her traditional classes, her grades hovering just above failing, despite clear signs of intelligence. Her teachers described her as distracted and unfocused, but I saw something else when I reviewed her file. Isabella had a gift for spatial reasoning that was extraordinary. She could visualize complex three-dimensional structures in her mind, understand architectural principles intuitively, and solve engineering problems that stumped students with much higher GPAs. But none of this was reflected in her transcript. Working with the program, we arranged for Isabella to spend part of her day in a local architecture firm, where her talents could be properly utilized and developed. The change was immediate and dramatic. Her confidence soared, her grades improved, and she began to see herself as someone with valuable skills, rather than someone who was failing. By the end of the year, Isabella had designed a community garden that was actually built in a local park. Her work caught the attention of the State University's architecture program, which offered her a scholarship based on her portfolio, rather than her test scores. Stories like Isabella's became the foundation of everything I did. Each student who found their path validated the belief that had sustained Emma through her darkest moments, that everyone belongs somewhere, and sometimes it just takes the right person to see their potential. But the work wasn't without challenges. There were still teachers who resisted change, parents who questioned the value of supporting those students, and administrators who worried about maintaining the school's prestigious reputation. The same attitudes that had driven Ms. Hawthorne to publicly humiliate Emma were still present, just more carefully concealed. One particularly difficult situation involved a teacher named Mr. Richardson, who had been at Riverside for over 20 years. He taught advanced placement chemistry and had a reputation for being tough but fair. However, I began to notice a pattern in his grade distribution that troubled me. Students from wealthy families consistently performed better in his class than equally qualified students from lower-income backgrounds. When I reviewed his teaching methods, I discovered that he assigned expensive lab equipment purchases as homework, assuming all students had access to the resources needed to buy materials. Students who couldn't afford these materials were penalized with lower grades. Confronting Mr. Richardson about this practice was one of the most difficult conversations I had in my new role. He was genuinely surprised by my concerns, having never considered that his assignments might be discriminatory. He wasn't malicious, just oblivious to the reality that not all students had the same resources. "But these are basic materials," he protested. "Any serious student should be able to obtain them." "Mr. Richardson," I replied, thinking of Emma's years of buying used textbooks and making do with outdated equipment. For some families, spending $50 on chemistry supplies means going without groceries for a week. We need to find ways to ensure that every student has access to the tools they need to succeed. The conversation led to the creation of a resource-sharing program that provided necessary materials to students who couldn't afford them. Mr. Richardson became one of the program's strongest supporters, and his classes became models of equitable teaching practices. These small victories accumulated over time, creating a culture shift that rippled through the entire school. Students began to see diversity as a strength rather than a challenge. Teachers developed more inclusive practices, and administrators recognized that excellence could come from anywhere. The transformation was perhaps most visible during the 4th annual Chancellor's Award ceremony, since Emma's incident. The recipient that year was a young man named Antonio Martinez, whose journey paralleled Emma's in many ways. He had overcome significant obstacles to achieve academic excellence, and his selection represented a clear statement that merit, not privilege, was the true measure of worth. As I watched Antonio accept his award, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. Emma's public humiliation had been transformed into a catalyst for systemic change. My own feelings of inadequacy had been channeled into a career dedicated to ensuring that other families wouldn't face the same challenges. But perhaps the most profound transformation was yet to come. During Emma's senior year at Stanford, she called me with news that would bring our story full circle. "Mom," she said, her voice filled with excitement, "I've been accepted to Harvard's graduate program in education policy. But that's not the best part. They want me to research and develop programs for supporting first-generation college students. They're offering me a full fellowship to essentially continue the work you've been doing at Riverside." I felt tears welling in my eyes as I processed what she was telling me. The girl who had been told she didn't belong was now being invited to help create systems that would ensure other students never felt that way. "But there's more," Emma continued. "They want me to co-author a book about our experience, about how families can advocate for educational equity. They think our story could help other parents and students navigate these challenges." The book project became a labor of love for both of us. Working together, we chronicled not just Emma's journey, but the broader transformation that had occurred at Riverside High School. We interviewed students, teachers, parents, and administrators to understand how one moment of conflict had sparked years of positive change. The writing process was sometimes painful, requiring us to relive difficult memories and examine our own growth. But it was also healing, helping us understand how our individual struggles had contributed to something larger than ourselves. The book, titled "You Do Belong Here: A Mother and Daughter's Journey Through Educational Equity," was published 2 years later. It became required reading in several education programs and sparked conversations about inclusion and belonging in schools across the country. But the real measure of its impact came in the letters we received from readers. Parents wrote to tell us how the book had given them courage to advocate for their children. Students shared stories of how our experience had helped them find their own voices. Educators described how the book had changed their teaching practices. One letter, in particular, stood out. It came from a teacher in a small rural school who had read our story and recognized her own prejudices. She wrote about how she had unconsciously favored students from certain backgrounds and how our book had helped her understand the harm she had been causing. "I realized that I had been Ms. Hawthorne," she wrote. "I had been the person telling students they didn't belong, not with words but with actions. Your story helped me see that every student deserves to be seen for their potential, not their circumstances." These letters reminded us that transformation is never finished, that every generation must learn anew how to see beyond surface differences to recognize the potential in every individual. As I write this now, 5 years after that pivotal ceremony, Emma has completed her graduate program and is working with the Department of Education to develop national policies for supporting underserved students. She has become the expert she once needed, the advocate she once wished for, and the voice that speaks for students who might otherwise go unheard. I continue to work at Riverside High School, though my role has expanded to include consulting with other schools facing similar challenges. The program I helped create has been replicated in districts across the state, and the principles we developed have influenced policy discussions at the national level. The trophy that started it all still sits on Emma's desk, now joined by other awards and recognitions. But its significance has evolved. It's no longer just a symbol of Emma's individual achievement, but a reminder of the power of believing in yourself and standing up for what's right. The teacher who tried to diminish Emma's moment of triumph could never have imagined that her cruel words would ultimately lead to systemic change that would benefit thousands of students. In trying to exclude one remarkable young woman, she had inadvertently created a movement that would make education more inclusive for everyone. That's the paradox of trying to tear down someone who truly belongs. It often just reveals their hidden strength and helps them discover their true purpose. Emma's journey from that painful moment on the stage to her current role as a national advocate for educational equity proves that our greatest challenges can become our greatest opportunities. The girl who was told she didn't belong now spends her days ensuring that other students never have to hear those words. And in doing so, she has created a legacy that will outlast any trophy, any award, and any moment of temporary recognition. Because in the end, belonging isn't about where you start or what others think of you. It's about who you become and how you use your experiences to lift others up. Emma learned that lesson on a stage in front of hundreds of people, and she has spent every day since then proving that she belongs anywhere she chooses to make a difference. The woman who once felt invisible in the halls of Riverside High School now walks those same halls with purpose and authority, working every day to ensure that no student ever feels the way Emma felt, and that no parent ever has to watch their child face that kind of public humiliation. Our story continues to unfold, day by day, student by student, as we work to create a world where everyone truly belongs. And in that ongoing work, we find not just purpose, but proof that the most powerful transformations often begin with the most painful moments, and that the greatest victories are won not by those who never face challenges, but by those who transform their challenges into opportunities to help others. The Chancellor's Award ceremony that seemed like an ending was actually a beginning. The moment that could have destroyed Emma's confidence instead became the foundation for a lifetime of advocacy, and the family that once felt out of place in the world of privilege and prestige found their true home in the work of making that world more welcoming to everyone. That's the ultimate lesson of our journey, that belonging isn't something that's given to you or taken away from you. It's something you create, something you earn, and something you share with others who need to find their own place in the world.